everybody, welcome back again. My name is Sue,
Hi, and I'm Alex.
and we are back with you with our HopeWorks podcast, where we discuss lots of interesting topics in the area of well-being and creating a flourishing life. And Alex, one of the things that's top of our agenda for today is kindness. And this has been particularly resonating with you recently. So tell us a little bit more about why it's resonating first, and then we'll talk about what it is and what we do.
Sure. I think the main reason it's resonating with me is we've reached a point in our world environment where you, we've sorry, I'm stumbling over this because it kind of gets me quite emotional, but people seem to be heading back over and not understanding of what it's like to lead, what it's like to be manly or masculine, and kindness seems to be a kind of forgotten trait in our world today. And yet, I think it's the core of who we are as a species. And I've spent a lifetime trying to convince people that to lead well, and also to be male, you can actually be kind as well.
Mm. So why do you think kindness has got a bit of a bad rap, or why, or as in why has it dropped off potentially?
I think we've been bombarded with stuff on social media and in the broader legacy media, that portrays leadership about as being about power. That has suggested very strongly that dominating is the key factor in being successful in our society. And yet all the evidence is exactly the opposite. We tend to forget we're primates. And if you look at primate societies, yes, there is violence and aggression. Chimpanzees being a classic example of that. But if you're not part of the broader community, you wither and you die.
Yeah. That's actually very true because when you think about it, human beings are collaborative species, if you like. Yes, we talk about competition and, genetics and the fight for,
Mm.
getting your genes out there. But actually, as human beings, and I always sort of half joke is, human beings don't spit out a baby and say, off you go.
Yeah.
We have to connect and come together and collaborate. So being kind and being connected and being supported is essential to us thriving and flourishing.
Yeah, and I mean, I love what you've just said, so I think it's so important. Again, it's a complete misunderstanding that people have been indoctrinated with this idea that Charles Darwin talked about survival of the fittest when he talked about species. And he did to a broad degree, but when he talked about human beings, he talked about survival of the collaborative species.
Yeah.
And that's how, for good or bad, we've become the dominant species on this planet, is through collaborating with one another. And you can call that all sorts of things. You can call it a family, a tribe, a community, or an organization. It's all the
Mm.
same thing. It's about working together.
So let's just talk more about this then. When we talk about this, in actually, let's think about the animal kingdom for a moment, because we know that there are examples of animals being kind and altruistic, even to the extent that an animal will put itself at harm's way for the sake of others in its species. So it's clearly inbuilt in us. So what can we do with that knowledge? How can we use that knowledge that whether we are nature as well, how do we
Yeah.
bring that knowledge to life better?
A fabulous question, and I think I'm going to go off on a wee bit of a tangent, if you
Oh,
don't mind, and
excellent.
come back to it, because I think one of the things that we haven't talked about on these podcasts has been the root of positive psychology.
Mhm.
And you can trace the roots of positive psychology back through, obviously, the broader science of psychology. But what often people haven't come to realize is the roots of psychology is actually in philosophy. So, I mean, that can be argued for pretty much most sciences, but if you
Yes.
go back to some of the great traditional philosophers, they're talking about things that we would now classify
Mm.
under the umbrella of psychology. And why that matters is when we're talking about things like kindness, we need to be able to describe what it is we're talking about. And
Yeah.
I think that philosophy gives us the tool to do that. So often in the positive psychology world, we'll talk about things like a life lived well. Well, what do we actually mean? And when we talk about kindness, I think the biggest confusion comes between kindness and compassion. And,
Mhm.
and I'm aware that we've talked about compassion in one of our podcasts in the past,
Yeah,
which is why I wanted to distinguish the two things.
yeah,
And whilst there is some overlap, they are different. So compassion comes from I see you suffering and I want to help alleviate that suffering.
yeah.
Kindness is I want to treat you well, and that doesn't have to be a prerequisite of suffering
Suffering,
existing.
yeah, yeah,
So it's a way of just interacting with the world. Um, so it's, if you like, kindness is about how you act on generally on a day-to-day basis. Whereas, as I say, compassion has this prerequisite of seeing suffering. So
yeah.
I think that matters enormously when we're talking about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that distinction, Alex, because you're right. Compassion is you're suffering and I want to help you, whereas kindness, I can just be kind for the
Yes.
sake of being kind. You don't need anything from me. You're not suffering. I can still be a kind person. What's the distinction of this sort of kindness and altruism then, if we can distinguish those two things?
I probably will struggle to answer that, to be honest with you. I think that, kindness is done without an intent for something to be returned to
Hmm.
you. It's something that can be really, really small. It's a tiny little act that you can demonstrate to another human being. It could be as simple as somebody's in the supermarket and they're struggling to reach something from a shelf, and you help them do that. It doesn't have to be any kind of grand gesture.
Yeah.
It's also important to remember that kindness includes kindness to yourself as well.
Mm.
That's it's important to understand that that matters as well,
Yeah.
and often that's about our internal dialogue, and changing the internal dialogue to forgive yourself.
Mm. So there's a few things here I want to pick up on, Alex,
Yeah,
because it's interesting. Is there's this endless sort of quest of can you really be kind without sort of it being about you? Because sometimes when you do a kind act, it's kind of like, is there a selfless good deed? And anybody who watched Friends
yeah,
years ago will know Phoebe was trying to find a selfless good deed because Joey said they didn't exist. And I think one of the things with kindness is when you're kind, you often feel better. But from
yeah.
what I'm hearing, the importance is the intention. Am I just doing it to get something back, or am I just doing it with no intent of getting anything in return?
Well, whilst I accept everything you've just said, and I think that the science and the research would support pretty much this argument about, is there any such thing as a good deed that doesn't in some way benefit the person that did it? I would actually argue yes, there is. I think I've personally witnessed or experienced situations where I've done a good deed, if you like, and people have mocked me for it.
Yeah.
So I recall many, many years ago now, I was living in the northeast of England where men are supposed to be violent and aggressive and nasty to one another. And there was a person who was struggling homeless on the street, and I did an act of what I would regard as kindness for that person. And
Yeah.
everybody I was with, some were close to me, mocked me for it.
Yeah.
So I suffered, if you like, because that mocking
Yeah.
went on for weeks. It was brought up in conversation on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But generally, what the evidence shows is that it can fall into a kind of a number of areas that benefit for you. So
Yeah.
people self-report higher levels of happiness if they're kind on a regular basis. That falls also into the bracket of thriving, which so people kind of flourish more in life, if you like. They show more resilience in life, and we also can measure lower levels of anxiety and lower levels of depression in
Mm.
people who regularly engage in acts of kindness.
Yeah.
So. ultimately, I suppose you can always argue, hey, I've benefited in some way, even if it's only to have information to share on this podcast.
Yeah. Well, what I really love though is you've given us the distinction between
Yeah,
kindness and altruism, because altruism often says that you will still be kind even if you're at risk.
yeah,
And to
right,
your point,
right.
there was a risk to you of showing kindness. It
Yes,
wasn't maybe a physical risk, but it was a psychological risk of being mocked. And yet you
yeah,
still did it anyway. But
yeah,
there's another thing in what you said that I think is really interesting is I often talk to people about the distinction. So we often hear the terms random act of kindness.
yeah,
It's often used. And I always think there's a distinction between a spontaneous act of kindness and a random act of kindness. So a spontaneous act of kindness is, I don't know you, but you're walking down the street in front of me, and then I see you trip and I help you up, or you drop
yeah,
something and I help you pick it up, or you walk towards a door and I open it for you.
yeah,
That's kind and it's wonderful and it should be encouraged and that's courteous and we do those things. But that's like it's an opportunity. It's right there. I can see it. Let me do it. I always think a random act of kindness is back to your point of you don't need anything. You aren't about to trip. You aren't about to drop anything. You don't
yeah.
need me to open a door, but it's random to you, as in it's unexpected to you. What are your thoughts about my little sort of hypothesis there of the difference between those two?
I think that's absolutely perfect. So I think you've described it really, really well. And in terms of people increasing acts of kindness in their own life, I don't think we can rely on those spontaneous moments.
Exactly.
Uh,
You're waiting for people to.
exactly, which probably defeats the object. Yes, I suppose you could maybe set out to trip them up in order to pick them up.
Don't do that, everybody. Don't do
Yeah.
that.
Uh, so I think it's much more realistic to focus on those random acts of kindness which you can create on a very frequent basis in your life. Uh, and if we were to kind of go to what would the recommendation be in terms of people actually introducing a kind of a kindness act process into their life, then that's one thing I would say is what I've advised people to do in the past is to have a regular day that becomes their kindness day,
Yeah,
and they may choose to do 4 or 5 acts of kindness in that day.
yeah,
It doesn't have to be every single day. It could be a Friday, it could be a Tuesday,
yeah.
whatever works.
And I love that, Alex, because as you know, the research tells us that doing five in one day is better than one per day for 5 days.
Yeah, yeah,
Because when it's one per day for 5 days, you tend to retrofit things as in, oh, I made Alex a cup of tea, that will do.
yeah,
Whereas
yes,
when you have to do five in one day, you're kind of very conscious and
yeah.
intentional about it. So I'd like to ask your opinion on this and again, for all of our listeners, the types of things we can do, because I sometimes hear people say, oh, I don't think I should do anything if it involves money, or I don't think I should do anything if they don't know who it is, should I put my name on it, or I want to see their response, etc. Can you give us some ideas of some of those little random acts of kindness that people might want to engage in?
Yeah, certainly. And in fact, I would actually say that all the things that you've just listed could also be included in that. It
Mm,
really depends entirely upon the circumstances. It can be just sitting listening to somebody and I'm sure at some point in time in our conversations we'll talk about listening as a skill set and how it's way more complex than people think it is. But just actually being with somebody. It can be, as I said before, assisting somebody in a way where I mentioned the kind of getting the stuff down from the shelf in the supermarket.
yeah,
It can be holding the door open for somebody. It can be as simple as smiling. I mean, I recall in one conversation with yourself, you talked about when you went from place to place, you would
yeah,
just smile at people in the street. That's an act of kindness. It says, I see you, I recognize you, and I feel a connection to you. And I'm sure that brightens most people's day when you
yeah,
actually do that. So it doesn't have to be monetary, it doesn't have
mm,
to be a big gesture, but it can be as
yeah,
well. I think if you're wanting the person to know it was you that did it, that motivation's slightly different in
yeah,
itself. Uh, the um, smiling at somebody randomly in the street, they'll never know who you were when you did
yeah,
that,
yeah.
but you could have brightened the day.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to share an example, if I may, Alex.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, when I turned 50, I actually planned this 3 years ahead of time. Okay,
Wow.
so for everybody to know, random does not mean spontaneous. So,
Yeah.
and I stole this idea from a lovely colleague, Scott, who told me I could steal his idea. But when I turned 50, I decided, say 3 years before, I mapped it out that I was going to have a random act of kindness day. So I told all my friends and family, I'm not having a party, I'm not having a dinner, I don't want any presents. All I'm going to ask is, will you do a random act of kindness on my behalf on my birthday? And I decided myself, and this is why it took 3 years to plan, that I would give 50, actually 53, but I'll get to the three in a moment because that's going to lead us on to another bit of your conversation earlier,
Mm.
is I'm going to do 53 random acts of kindness. So I designed a well-being journal and I had it printed. I had them all wrapped and I put ribbons on them. I hand wrote cards, so several every night. I'd handwrite cards, 50 cards, put them in an envelope saying gift to you to give or pass on, etc. And then on my birthday, I did the three first for me, which I'll come back to. And then I basically took these 50 and I secretly went round my neighborhood in about a 5 kilometer radius and I popped them on car windscreens. And there
Wow.
was a lady in a cafe who'd cleared the table and she'd left the sort of squeezy and the cleaning fluid there. And as soon as she'd gone, I propped one up against
Uh,
the bottle and then
uh,
ran off. And so I had the best morning. I was on such a high when I got down to my last one. I'm like, oh, I don't want to give it away. And it was the most wonderful, wonderful day. But even better was 100 people around the world did random acts of kindness to me on my birthday. One lady even did 50 over the
That's
weekend.
incredible. That's amazing.
Um, and I loved it. It was my best
Yeah,
birthday
yeah, yeah,
because of that. And the research tells us that when we do a random act of kindness for somebody else, it is one of the best antidotes to loneliness. What are your
yeah.
thoughts about that with that sort of example?
I mean, I would love to pick up on this idea of it being an antidote to loneliness because, yeah, again, you're 100% right. The research is really clear on this. We are a species that has a deep need to connect with other people. And that doesn't mean through technology. I'm not a great lover of buzz terms, but I know in the US people are talking about skin hunger, this idea that people are connecting through technology but not actually physically touching other human beings.
Mm.
Um, and therefore, it can be just simply putting your hand on somebody's shoulder. It can be shaking somebody's hand. We need that connection to others, and it doesn't have to be a deep connection. It doesn't have to be a frequent connection. It doesn't have to be somebody you know. All those examples you've just given, that ripple effect of how your birthday improved the lives of hundreds of people across this planet. How
Mm.
astonishing is that, really? Yeah,
Oh, well, I think to your point is even though I didn't, so all of mine were anonymous. I didn't want
yeah,
anybody to see me, but I felt so connected. And even one of them, a friend of mine, I wasn't on any social media groups in the area because we'd only just moved here, but somebody I knew was, and she forwarded me a message where somebody had taken a photo of the journal and the wrapping and whatever you. And her comment was, I got back to my car in the supermarket car park and I saw something on my window. I've been having a particularly bad time lately, and I wondered what it was. Thank you to the gorgeous human being who left this for me. You've restored my faith in humanity.
wow, how
And
beautiful.
I felt so connected to that woman. I
Yeah,
still remember it because
yeah.
it changed her day, which probably changed how she showed up. And I think to your point of that kindness element, when we are kind to the person in the supermarket or the person that we smile at or the person that we just give our time to, we don't know how that's going to impact them and then go on to impact dozens of others.
Yeah, I mean, I had a very different experience, but an experience that kind of reflects that. And I have to couch this by saying, it sounds quite dramatic, and it's important that people understand that these acts of kindness don't have to be as dramatic as this. It's just one example, but I was working with somebody who was treated quite badly by her boss. And she had lost all confidence and all belief in herself, didn't know what to do in terms of getting out of the situation she was in. And at the time, I was doing a lot of leadership coaching, traveling from city to city, and I was in a gorgeous position, to be honest with you. I'm getting paid quite well for doing it. And the businesses that were bringing me to those cities were covering all my expenses. So I said to this woman, look, I'll coach you in the evenings around your future if you want. The only thing I ask of you is don't share with other people that I'm doing this because I'm doing it for nothing, and that's it. Anyway, to cut a long story short, she ended up setting up her own organization, and her own organization was to help improve the lives of people in her community. And she's from a Pacific Island community. And last year they supported 5,000 people from nothing. And nobody to this day knows about my involvement in that organization.
Wow.
And that was years of it. And I don't know. I've seen videos of some of the people that have been supported, but I wouldn't know them if I walked past them in the street.
Yeah.
Uh,
What a beautiful
mm,
example of just the kindness of you seeing that person, helping that person, giving
mm,
your time, and then who knows what's going to happen beyond that.
yeah.
I think that's just beautiful. So, Alex, I'm going to come to, so I've got two more sort of thoughts in my head, but I want to come back to the self aspect because on my birthday, and you mentioned this at the very beginning about being kind to self, and I recognized I'd planned this for 3 years, but I had not thought about myself. And so I decided I'd never been to a Pilates reformer class, so I was going to go and have a massage, a facial, which I'd only had like two in my life. So I had going to have a massage, a facial, and go to a Pilates reformer class. And I did those three
Yeah.
things for myself first.
Brilliant.
Why is kindness to self important, and why is it different to self-indulgence?
Again, I think that's superb. Years ago, I worked alongside another leadership coach, and one of her favorite terms was self-compassion. But what she actually meant was self-indulgence. She didn't mean being compassionate at all, and it became an excuse for inaction.
Mhm.
As opposed to taking control of things. And you and I have often talked about the importance of small acts.
Mm,
Um, so I think that the distinction for me really is that we our acts of self-kindness need to have an outcome towards the end of it. So there's a purpose to our acts of self-kindness. It's not simply for the sake of it.
mm,
So the things that you've just described actually had some benefit to you as a human being.
mm,
And it sounds quite a lot of it was physical, or could be emotional related, but there was a benefit for you.
mm,
Um, and that for me, I think is key here. And I would always link it to the stories that you're telling about yourself. Because again, I mean, it's perhaps a subject for another day, but I think one of the most important things that we need to get a hold of is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves.
mm,
And we have a choice with that story, and I think we can learn to be kind with the story as well. And when we're saying I'm struggling, I can't do this, I'm not as good as so and so, it's often worth just checking in and saying what's the evidence to support this,
mm.
and that in itself can become a simple act of kindness towards yourself.
Yes, challenging your thoughts when they're
Yeah.
putting you down. Yeah.
Yes.
So, what would be some of your go-to random acts of kindness?
Uh, I think for me, it's difficult because it's situational. So it depends on where you are with people. But it used to be when I was in the workplace, simply the act of listening. That was the kind of biggest thing. I was blessed that that was a large proportion of my job anyway. Um, but often it included subjects that wouldn't necessarily be seen as traditional within the workplace. And this is not listening to resolve anything. It wasn't coaching. It wasn't helping people to map out where to go or anything like that. It was simply just being there for
Mm.
somebody. Uh, I remember again, sorry, this is probably not answering your question, but I remember I did a master's of business coaching, and as part of that, we had to do these practice coaching sessions together. And there was a woman actually who was called Sue herself, who I was coaching, and I just sat and listened. I didn't ask anything. I didn't say a word. The whole coaching session went on for half an hour, and I just sat there and nodded and smiled and did all the non-verbal stuff. Uh, and the lecturer was saying that was just the most powerful thing I've ever seen, and Sue started to cry, and it was just that she felt heard.
Yeah.
That was it. Nothing more than that. I couldn't do anything else about it,
Yeah.
but it could be heard.
Mm.
Uh, I also do, genuinely connect with what you've said about smiling with other people. You know, you can't fake it if people know if you're being sincere. And I think that, I'm a great lover of Elaine Hatfield's concept of emotional contagion.
Mhm.
If you're upbeat and positive around people, they'll feed off that and they'll start to become upbeat and positive.
Yeah.
For those of you who are not familiar with it, the idea is that emotions spread in groups like a virus. And generally the most powerful person, but that doesn't necessarily mean the most senior person, will introduce that emotion. But you can choose to introduce that positive emotion. So it can
Yeah.
be that as well. It can be as simple as being positive and happy around somebody.
Yeah. And what I really love about when you said that example from your coaching sort of previous situation is you said she felt listened to, she felt valued. And I think for me, that is always one of the best things about a random act of kindness is you are seeing somebody. Like when people go to the supermarket, often they're not even connecting with the person. You go into a shop and you go, "Hi, how are you today? Yeah, fine, thanks. Yep." And but
Yeah,
it's not you're not seeing them, you're just doing the social
yeah,
dance. And I remember a situation, one of the programs that I run, we get people to go out and do 15 minutes with as many random acts of kindness as you can
mm,
do in 15 minutes.
brilliant.
And I remember I had this one lady who was mortified at the idea. She said,
Mm,
when she came back in the next day, she said, I am highly introverted. I was really not looking forward to it. She said, all I wanted to do at the end of the session was go for a walk, and I would always put my AirPods in. I would not be looking at anybody, making eye contact, talking to anyone. She said, I deliberately left my AirPods at home. And she said, as I walked, I made eye contact and I smiled at people.
yeah,
And she said, I felt really uncomfortable initially, but she said, then it
yeah,
was like, oh, they smiled
yeah,
back. And then she said she went into a shop and it was a beautiful little gifty type shop. And she thought, I know, I'll compliment
mm,
the owner of how beautiful the shop is. And I know the shop she went into, so it is a particularly beautiful shop. And she was telling us that next morning what a high she left on because
yeah.
she had seen the woman and the effort that had been put in and seen the shop and validated it. And the woman apparently just like expanded no end of getting this compliment on the setup of her shop and the beauty. But also, the lady who was doing the random acts of kindness
Mm.
left literally floating because she had made a difference to somebody. And I wonder if all those examples you've given us are because the person has felt seen and validated. And maybe that's the biggest random act of kindness.
I think you're absolutely again spot on too, and I think there's a really magic thing in what you've just said that maybe get missed if we don't pick up on it, which is you talked about people kind of being out amongst other people but being disconnected. Being around people isn't the antidote to loneliness.
Yeah,
Being connected with people is the antidote to loneliness.
yeah,
And as you talked about it, recall I don't know if I've mentioned this before on these podcasts, but my greatest moments of happiness are walking on the beach holding my wife's hand. That they are the most beautiful moments. And of late, we've found a different beach that we've been walking on, and one that we're not used to at all. And we start seeing different people that we haven't seen. And I've seen this one gentleman walking on the beach on his own, and we walk past each other, and I try to acknowledge everybody that walks past, but he's always looked away. But yesterday I waved and he waved back, and that was just an amazing moment. That was a magical moment.
yeah,
Uh, it was again, I've seen you, I recognize you as who you are,
yeah.
uh,
How
and I
beautiful.
accept you for who you are.
I love that.
Mm.
And thank you, Alex, because I always say to people one of the nicest random acts of kindness is just seeing somebody, but
Yes.
also accepting it yourself. So when somebody does
Yeah.
something nice to you, saying thank you so that the
Yeah.
person knows that they have also been validated and seen for what they've done for you.
Yeah, and this for me circles back to some of the things that we talked about earlier. That I know of a group of people that I've spent some of my life with who would have said, well, that person ignored you multiple times, therefore. I'll never acknowledge them. Um,
Well,
but it was just I don't know his story. I've got no idea. He could have been deep in thought. He could have been blind, for all I know. So you know, you go with it, and that deep connection benefits both parties.
yeah, absolutely. So, for everybody listening, how do we start small? Give us some examples of small things we can do to bring kindness to life.
I think I would go back to what I said earlier on. I would say choose a day that you're going to be kind on, and make it a regular day. So a day that you will have the opportunity to do that because there may be reasons in your life where you don't. Pick 4 or 5 things that you would like to do on those days. And it could be really small things, like we've already said, smile, nod, hold the door open for somebody. Your example of the person going into the shop and complimenting the person in the shop, anything like that, just really, really small things. And then on top of that is the day after, whichever day you chose, sit and reflect on the things that you did and do that for a month. So do that for 4 weeks, um, and then try another set of different things. So it'll be the same 4 things
Yeah.
each week for 4 weeks, and then try a different set, and so on and so on. And it'll become just part of who you are. You'll stop having to think about it.
I love that, Alex. And I love it because I've heard many people say that they are genuinely kind anyway. They're always doing
Yeah,
nice things for other people. But what I really love that you said is do different things because you might find you get certain things that you resort to all the time. Like I know one of mine is picking up rubbish. If ever I see rubbish on the beach or whatever, you always pick it up. One of mine is always making eye contact or complimenting
yeah,
people and those sorts of things. But maybe there's also that opportunity, as you say, to let's try something different that maybe
yes.
stretches you out of your comfort zone a little bit more, and try something new.
Exactly. And I mean, for years I worked with somebody in America who I think had a beautiful concept, and he would talk about the transition moments. And he said that every time he walked through a doorway, he would actually pause and think, what energy do I want to bring into
Mm,
the next room I'm walking into? And I think that we can use that in our day-to-day life. What energy do I want to bring to each
mm.
interaction with every human being I'm working with or spending time with?
That is beautiful. What a brilliant way to bring our podcast to a close, Alex, because I think that is a random act of kindness by itself of saying, who do I want to enter the room as? What energy am I bringing in? And
Yeah,
being conscious about that. I think that's beautiful.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you. So
Oh,
there's
thank you.
lots of really cool stuff around kindness. And what I love is you've brought to life some of the research. So yes, there's research that tells us antidote to loneliness, it increases well-being and thriving and flourishing and happiness. But actually, to your point, it's the tiny little things that we do every day about choosing to be kind, whether it's to
Yeah.
ourselves or others.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we will see you next time.
Cheers, folks. Bye.